And welcome to this Webisode edition of Talking Points. I'm Chilekasi Adele. North Country New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik has been considering a run for governor in 2022. Joining us to talk more about this is Talking Points analyst Lindsey. Lindsey, thank you for joining us today. Let's first start with this question here. She hasn't set anything in stone yet. Do we have any inkling into what she's leaning towards? Because if she doesn't run for governor, she can still run for Congress next year.
Yeah, so in 2022, she's up for re-election in Congress, as you mentioned, but she also might run for governor. And it's really up in the air. She hasn't said which way she's leaning, but even just her talking about possibly running for governor is a big deal. And no matter which way she's running, she's already raised $1.2 million towards her campaign since January, which is a lot of money, especially since she doesn't even know what she's running for yet.
So she represents this district in northern New York. It's not that well noted of a district, but she's a very well-known GOP congresswoman. Kind of give me an overview of some of the things that she's done in her years on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, so when she was elected into Congress in 2015, she was the youngest woman ever elected into Congress, which is a big deal, of course. And since then, she's been a really vocal supporter of former President Trump. She didn't support either of the efforts to impeach him, and also sided with Texas in the Texas versus Pennsylvania lawsuit after the 2020 election. You
mentioned that Stefanik is a very big ally to former President Donald Trump. There's going to be a lot of Democrats out there in New York State who are going to try and hit her on that. How positively or negatively do you think that her alliance with President Trump will affect her performance if she decides to run for governor in 2022?
I'm not sure if her affiliation with President Trump would necessarily be the biggest factor that would affect her run, because the only other person who's officially said that he's going to run against Governor Cuomo in 2022 was also a big supporter of President Trump. So I think the bigger question will be the changing demographics in New York, and also if a Republican can even win in the historically blue state.
That's very interesting you mentioned that. There are a lot of people, especially with this pandemic, moving to places like Florida, moving to other states. Very interesting to see how that will affect turnout for both parties in that 2022 election next year. Final question here. If Governor Cuomo decides to run for governor again in 2022, with all he's been battled with, nursing home scandals, sexual harassment allegations, how do you think, if Stefanik decides to run, will that be able to boost her numbers, or do you think that Cuomo will still have a stronghold over him?
Well, so I definitely think Governor Cuomo's recent scandals have obviously affected his chances in 2022. I think before all of this happened, and especially with all of the positive praise he got in the early pandemic around his handling and his daily briefings, I think he had a much better chance of getting that fourth term. And now I think it's a little bit more up in the air. So I think all of that combined with the changing demographics, as you mentioned, in New York, and just the different turnouts of the different demographics in New York will be the biggest factor in whether or not she can actually win this gubernatorial race, if she decides to run in it at all.
It will definitely be a very interesting race to see. Of course, we mentioned the big power in Governor Cuomo, three-term governor, looking for a fourth, and a lot of Republicans who are trying to get the mantle, as Governor Cuomo has fallen a little bit in his approval over these recent scandals that we've seen. Lindsey, thank you so much. And thank you for watching this Webisode edition of Talking Points. Make sure to watch our show every Monday night at 6 p.m. on OTN, and follow us on Twitter at CitrusTV News. From all of us here, good night.